Now that we know the basic workings of a React application, or at least a very rudimentary one, let's actually go ahead and build a component. So I'm going to delete app.js and app.css. Alright. Now if I save it, it fails to compile because it cannot find app.js. It's attempting to import here. There's no file, there's no export, so it's not going to happen. So in the source directory, create a new file and call it let's call it application.js. Now in here, the first thing we need to do is to import React and React's component class so that we can create our own component. And so let's do that. So import React component, and the curly braces there are important, from React. Now drop down a few lines and we're actually going to start building out our component. So we're going to write class application extends component, and we're going to open that up. Now by itself this does not export it, so every time we create a class that we want to use in another file, if it's going to be imported in another file, we're going to need to export it. So the syntax for that is export default and then the class name. So application. And we're going to save. Now in our index.js file, I'm going to remove that import and replace it with our new one. So import the export's name, so application from, and here we need to specify it's in the current directory, so /application, and hit semicolon. And by itself this will still fail because it's attempting to mount app. We don't have a class called app. It says app is not defined. So we are going to have to render our own component. So a component in React, so in ES6, is going to be written the same as HTML is. So you're going to open it with a pointy bracket, and then the application, and then it's self-closing. So you're going to close it. It can be self-closing. For the most part, it will be. We'll cover how to wrap components later on in the course, I'm sure. But for right now, this is the syntax for mounting our component. Now, if we go back to our browser, we don't have render. So this is a necessary method within our class. So what we need to do now is in application. The one essential method for a React component is called render. And what this method does is it returns HTML or text or variables, whatever the case may be. So we're going to return, just for right now, a string, which we're going to say hello world. And then we're going to end that with a semicolon. Now if we go back to our application, we see that that's exactly what we get. Just a string. And if I right click and go to inspect, we're going to see that it has mounted into the div by ID root. We also will get into React Dev Tools shortly, but for right now we can see that it's mounting. So a few things about the render method itself. It's like any other method. You can declare variables and whatnot and use them. And we can return in in brackets, HTML content. So I could change that to H1, hello world, and then hit save, Control S, and then open up my browser. We should get an H1. Now you'll notice that I'm not refreshing this, and that's because when you run npm start, what's happening is it loads a hot loader, which every time a change is detected, it will recompile and then refresh any connected clients. In this case, this browser. So this is automatically updating when I write new code and save it. Now, we can't, in this return method, have a top-level element and then another top-level element. We're going to see an error here. JSX expressions, this is ES6, JavaScript, the current implementation, must have one parent element. This means we can only have one top-level element. So I'm going to wrap both of these in a div and call it a day. There we go, problem solved. So now if I save, you're going to see it's going to compile, and the browser automatically refreshes, and we get this here. We get this. So that's basically how to write a render method in our own component. Now we can also print out variables in here and use content like that. And how we do that is within the render method, not the return statement. Within the render method itself, we can declare variables. So I'm going to write let. And for those of you who took my, I think it was called like complete front-end development course, and you learned JavaScript there, we used the keyword var to create variables. And this has scoping issues. If we declare it here, it can be used outside of this function, and that's not really safe. So we're going to always scope our variables correctly. We're going to either use let or const. So const is it basically means it's a constant. It can't be changed after it has been set. So we're going to say let name equals, and then that. We're going to save it. And now how we actually use this within the return statement is similar to other technologies that use curly braces. If you've used any model view controller kind of framework, this should be second nature to you by now. But in this instance, it's just one curly braces that wraps it. And then we print out the variable name. And we can load up our browser, and we see that it prints it out correctly. So I think that's it as far as this goes. We've just written a component. We've mounted it into a DOM element by ID root. And in the next video, we're going to talk about more special React methods for the component class.